I'm Christopher. I'm 32. And on my last birthday, my own brother toasted me as the family's biggest loser in front of everyone I love. Before I tell you how that single moment led to the biggest secret of my life being exposed and changing everything forever, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. Okay, so picture this. My small apartment, the one I work 60 hours a week to afford. It smells like the lemon rosemary chicken I'd spent hours on and the vanilla of the birthday cake I baked myself from scratch. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. And for my 32nd birthday, all I wanted was a quiet, peaceful dinner with my family. Just once. Of course, peace is a luxury my family doesn't trade in. They showed up 30 minutes late, not with apologies, but with an entrance. My younger brother, Leo, walked in like a rock star, sunglasses still on, immediately complaining about the parking. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, followed. My dad, without a word, walked straight to the counter, saw the special bottle of wine I'd been saving, a gift from a client, and started struggling with the cork. "Dad, that's for dinner," I said as gently as I could. He just grunted. "It's wine, Christopher. It's meant to be drunk." The cork popped. He poured a glass that was far too full. The night had begun. Dinner was a masterclass in my family's dynamics. My mom, Eleanor, spent the appetizer course lamenting my lack of a serious girlfriend and my unstable career choice. "A promotion is nice, honey, but is it secure? You work so hard. For what?" My dad, Richard, chimed in between mouthfuls of chicken. "He's not making real money yet, Eleanor. Let the boy figure it out. Not everyone is a born winner like Leo." He winked at Leo, who was, as usual, texting under the table. Leo, at 28, had never held a job for more than a few months. His life was a string of ventures and finding himself, all funded by a mysterious benefactor he jokingly called his patron. That patron was me. Then came the moment. The cake was on the table, candles unlit. Leo stood up, clinking his fork against his wine glass. A smirk played on his lips. The whole table, my parents, my Aunt Carol, my cousin Mark, all turned to him beaming. "A speech," my mother cooed. Leo raised his glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "To my big brother, Christopher. He's 32 now, still in this tiny apartment, still working that boring desk job. So let's all raise a glass to the biggest loser in this family." The table erupted in laughter. Not quiet chuckles. Loud, roaring laughter. My dad slapped the table. My cousin Mark howled. Even my mother had a wide, tight smile on her face. They thought it was hilarious. Something inside me snapped. A wire that had been stretched taut for 32 years finally broke. I slowly picked up my own glass. The table quieted slightly, expecting me to make a self-deprecating joke. I looked directly at Leo, my voice steady and cold. "And for the ones who just lost their streaming, grocery, and gas accounts." Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Leo's smirk vanished. His face went pale. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked out of my own apartment, leaving my untouched birthday cake on the table. The party was over. The war had just begun. To understand why that moment happened, you have to understand the last 10 years of my life. You see, I wasn't just Christopher, the quiet software engineer. To my family, I was the bank. And my brother, Leo, was my #1 client. Started small right after college. I landed a decent job and Leo didn't. He was exploring his options. That exploration started with, "Hey Chris, can you spot me $50 for gas?" Which soon became, "My car broke down, it's a $2,000 fix." I paid it. Then he moved into his own apartment. I co-signed the lease because his credit was non-existent. Soon after, his rent was late. Then it was 2 months late. The eviction notice came to me. To avoid a black mark on my own record, I paid it. From then on, I just paid his rent directly. It was easier. He just needs some time to get on his feet, my mom would say, her voice soft and pleading. But Leo never got on his feet. He just got more comfortable on his back. His life was a curated Instagram feed of brunches, weekend trips, and music festivals. My life was a spreadsheet of expenses. His expenses. There was his car payment, his insurance, his cell phone bill. He had all the premium streaming services, Netflix, HBO Max, Spotify, all on my accounts. He even had a supplementary credit card linked to my name. I'd see the statements. Ubers everywhere because he didn't want to deal with traffic. Expensive dinners with friends he wanted to impress. Designer clothes. He had a nickname for me. He'd say it with a laugh when he was on the phone with his friends. Loud enough for me to hear. "Oh, that? Don't worry about it. My sponsor is taking care of it." He thought it was a riot. Meanwhile, I was living on ramen noodles for the last week of every month. I took on freelance coding projects on weekends, my eyes burning from staring at a screen for 16 hours a day, just to make sure Leo's light stayed on. I remember one winter, the heating in my apartment broke. The landlord was slow to fix it, and I spent 2 weeks wearing my coat indoors because I couldn't afford a good space heater. That same month, I paid for Leo's ski trip to Colorado. He sent me a picture of himself on a ski lift, captioned, "Living the high life." I almost threw my phone against the wall. My best friend Sarah saw it all. We'd grab a cheap coffee, my one weekly indulgence, and she'd look at the dark circles under my eyes and just shake her head. "Chris, this is insane," she said one afternoon. "He's a leech. Your whole family is enabling him, and you're the one bleeding out. It's temporary." I'd lie, both to her and to myself. "Once his new venture takes off." Sarah just stirred her coffee, her expression grim. "There's always a new venture, isn't there? The podcast that never recorded an episode. The dropshipping business that never shipped anything. The life coaching certification he never finished. When are you going to wake up? This isn't helping him. It's crippling him." I knew she was right, but the guilt was a powerful chain. Every time I thought about cutting him off, my mother's voice would echo in my head. The guilt wasn't accidental. It was a carefully crafted tool, wielded with surgical precision by my mother, Eleanor. Whenever I even hinted at turning off the money tap for Leo, she would deploy her arsenal of emotional manipulation. I remember one phone call vividly. It was about 6 months before the infamous birthday party. I had just gotten a bill for Leo's credit card. Over $3,000. On it was a charge for a weekend stay at a boutique hotel. I had been working overtime to build up my savings, hoping to maybe put a down payment on a small condo one day. That bill wiped out half of my progress. I called my mom, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. "Mom, I can't do this anymore. Leo spent $3,000 last month. I can't afford his lifestyle." Her response was immediate. A soft, wounded sigh that traveled through the phone and twisted in my gut. "Oh, Christopher, don't be so dramatic. You know how sensitive Leo is. The world is a harsh place for a creative soul like him." "He's not a creative soul, Mom. He's an unemployed 27-year-old living off his brother." "You're the older brother," she'd say, her voice taking on a familiar, preachy tone. "It's your responsibility to look out for him. Family takes care of family. You're lucky you have a good head for numbers and things. Leo, he feels things more deeply than you or I. That kind of pressure, worrying about bills and a salary, it would crush him. It was always the same. Leo was a delicate flower, and I was the brutish gardener, expected to tend to him without complaint. My father, Richard, had a different, more direct approach. If my mother used guilt, my father used shame. I tried talking to him once, man to man. We were at a family barbecue. I pulled him aside, away from the crowd. "Dad," I started, "I'm worried about Leo. He has no ambition, no drive. My supporting him isn't helping." My dad took a long sip of his beer and looked at me with an expression of profound disappointment. "Your problem, Christopher, is that you're petty. You're keeping score. Is it really so hard for you to help your own brother? I never had a brother to help me. Be grateful. A promotion at some tech company doesn't make you a man. Taking care of your blood? That does." He clapped me hard on the shoulder. "Stop being so selfish." Selfish. The word echoed in my ears. I was working myself to the bone, sacrificing my own future, my own happiness, and I was the selfish one. Even extended family played their part. My Aunt Carol, my dad's sister, was the peacekeeper. Whenever tensions rose, she would swoop in with her sweet smile and calming voice. Now, she'd say, putting a hand on my arm. Let's not fight. We're family. Christopher, you're so stable and responsible. It's a gift. You're the rock of this family. We all appreciate you so much for what you do for Leo. It was a compliment wrapped around a cage. She was praising me for staying in my box, for being the reliable utility they all depended on. At the time, I thought she was just a kind woman who hated conflict. I had no idea she had her own reasons for keeping Leo dependent on me. I wouldn't find that out until much, much later. They had created a perfect system. My mother managed the emotional side. My father handled the shame, and the rest of the family provided the reinforcing chorus. And in this system, I had only one role: to provide. My feelings, my dreams, my struggles, they were all irrelevant. But the deepest cut, the one that festered beneath the surface for years, wasn't about the money. It was about a dream they took from me. During my final year of college, I was at the top of my game. I was a straight-A student in computer science, and I had an opportunity that felt like winning the lottery. I was offered a full scholarship for a master's program at a prestigious university in Germany. It was everything I had ever wanted. A chance to study abroad, to work with leading minds in my field, to see the world beyond my hometown. My acceptance letter was my golden ticket. I had my passport, my plane ticket was booked. I had saved up a few $1,000s to cover my initial living expenses. I was 2 weeks away from leaving. Then I got the call. It was my mother, and she was hysterical. "It's Leo," she sobbed. "He's in trouble. Real trouble." Leo, who was 19 at the time, had fallen in with a bad crowd. He'd racked up a massive gambling debt, $10,000, to some very unsavory people. They had given him 48 hours to pay up, or they were going to, in their words, break his legs. I rushed home. The scene in our living room was chaos. Leo was pale and shaking, a ghost of his usual arrogant self. My father was pacing back and forth, his face purple with rage. My mother was weeping on the sofa. "How could you be so stupid?" my father roared at Leo. "I don't have it," Leo cried. "I don't have the money." Then all eyes turned to me. "Christopher," my mother said, her voice trembling, "your savings. The money for Germany." My blood ran cold. "No, Mom, that's for my tuition deposit and my apartment. It's for my future." "What future?" my father snapped, his anger redirecting to me. "Your brother might not have a future if we don't fix this. Are you going to fly off to Europe and sip champagne while your brother gets beaten to a pulp? Is that the kind of man you are?" They hammered at me for hours. They told me I was abandoning them. They said that my education was a selfish luxury when Leo's life was on the line. They questioned my love, my loyalty, my very character. They knew my weakness, my desperate need for their approval. In the end, I broke. The next day, I walked into my bank, my acceptance letter feeling like a lead weight in my pocket. I withdrew every penny I had. I never told them that part of that money was a small college fund my grandfather had left specifically for me, a man who always believed in my potential. I handed the cash over. The debt was paid. I canceled my flight. I deferred my admission to the program, telling myself I'd go the next year. But the next year there was another crisis, and another the year after that. The dream of Germany faded, replaced by the reality of my responsibilities. It became a ghost that haunted me, a quiet reminder of the life I could have had, and they never, ever thanked me for it. In their minds, I had simply done my duty. That sacrifice was the foundation of the rage I felt at my birthday party. When Leo called me a loser, he wasn't just insulting my apartment or my job. He was mocking the very life I was forced to live because of him. And so, as I walked away from that shattered wine glass and my untouched cake, I was also walking away from that version of myself. The dutiful son, the responsible brother, the family's rock. He was gone. and I wasn't sure who was left. That night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo. Not an apology. Not a question asking if I was okay. It said, "Your Netflix isn't working. Fix it." I stared at the text message, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face in the darkness of my car. "Your Netflix isn't working. Fix it." Not even a please. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of it was breathtaking. It was as if the scene that had unfolded less than an hour ago, the shattered glass, my silent departure, as if none of it had happened. For a moment, the old Christopher, the path of least resistance Christopher, considered just logging in and resetting the password, just to make the problem go away. But then I thought of his smirk, the laughter, the word loser. My thumbs moved, typing out a reply that was 10 years overdue. "Not my problem anymore. You'll figure it out." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The reply came back instantly. What's that supposed to mean? I'm in the middle of a show. I didn't answer. I just started my car and drove, with no destination in mind. A few minutes later, another text. "Dude, my grocery delivery from Instacart was just canceled. The payment didn't go through. What did you do?" Again, I ignored it. I could picture him perfectly, sitting on his couch, annoyed that his seamless, effortless life had hit a minor speed bump. The idea that the road itself had been permanently closed off hadn't even occurred to him yet. Then my phone started ringing. It was Leo. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. A text notification popped up. A wall of text from Leo. "I can't believe you. You're so petty. Are you really doing this over a joke? A joke, Chris? You're going to starve me out because your feelings got hurt? Grow up. I need to eat." Turn the card back on. I kept driving. Then the next wave of the assault began. My mother. Her text was softer, laced with concern. "Christopher, honey, are you okay? Leo said your cards aren't working. Is everything all right with your job?" This was her classic move. Frame the problem as a concern for my well-being. I replied, "My job is fine. My cards are fine. Leo's access to them is not." The phone rang almost immediately. It was her. I knew I had to face this. I pulled over to the side of a deserted road and answered. "Christopher, thank God. I was so worried," she began, her voice thick with fake relief. "I'm fine, Mom." "Well, Leo isn't fine. He says you cut him off from everything. What's going on? Was his toast really that bad? You know how he is, he has a sharp sense of humor. He didn't mean it. It wasn't a joke, Mom. And you laughed." There was a pause. "We were just trying to lighten the mood. You're always so serious. Honey, this isn't the way to handle things. You can't just cut your brother off. He depends on you. That's the problem," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "It ends now. Don't be ridiculous," she said, her tone shifting from concern to command. "Turn his services back on. We can talk about this like a family tomorrow." "No." The line went silent for a long moment. Then she unleashed the guilt. "I don't know what's gotten into you. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By abandoning your brother? I raised you better than this." Before she could continue, Leo sent another voicemail. It was just a string of curses, ending with, "I hope you're happy living your miserable, poor life alone." That was it. I ended the call with my mother mid-sentence. I opened my contacts, found Leo's name, and hit the block button. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in years. The next few days were a blur of silence from my immediate family. They were clearly trying the silent treatment, assuming I would crack and come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. But something had shifted in me. The silence wasn't punishment. It was peace. However, I made a critical mistake. I underestimated how deep the family network of control went. David was a family friend, someone I had known since I was a kid. He was my father's golf buddy, a real estate agent who was always at our holiday dinners. He had always seemed like a neutral party, a decent guy. He'd often pull me aside and ask how I was really doing, with a look of genuine concern in his eyes. I thought I could trust him. He called me a week after the birthday incident. "Hey, Chris, your dad told me what happened. Just wanted to check on you, man. That sounds rough." His voice was so full of sympathy that my guard came down. For an hour, I poured my heart out to him. I told him everything. The years of financial burden, the pressure, the toll it was taking on my mental health. I even admitted something I hadn't told anyone else. That to keep up with Leo's spending, I'd had to sell off some company stock options I'd been given early on. A move that pained me deeply. I told him about the freelance work, the sleepless nights. I told him I felt like I was drowning. David listened patiently. "Wow," he said when I was done. "I had no idea it was that bad. You're doing the right thing, Chris. You have to put yourself first. If you need anything, I'm here for you." I hung up feeling a profound sense of relief. Finally, someone understood. Someone in their circle was on my side. I was a fool. 2 days later, my father called. His number popped up, and my stomach clenched. I almost ignored it, but I decided to face it head-on. "Hello." His voice was dripping with a cold, smug fury. "So, I hear things are tough for you," he started, no preamble. "I hear you're so broke you had to sell off your little stocks. I hear you're working yourself to death with side jobs." My blood froze. Every word he was saying was a direct quote from my confidential conversation with David. "Where did you hear that?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "David and I had a round of golf yesterday," he said with relish. "He told me everything. He's worried about you. We're all worried about you. It all makes sense now." "What makes sense?" "Your behavior," he practically shouted into the phone. "You're not setting boundaries. You're just a jealous, bitter failure. You're lashing out at your brother because you can't stand that he enjoys life while you're slaving away at a dead-end job. You're angry that you mismanaged your own money, so you're taking it out on him." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. David hadn't been concerned. He had been gathering intelligence. He had run straight to my father, armed with my deepest vulnerabilities, and they had twisted them into weapons to use against me. My financial struggles weren't a result of their pressure. They were proof of my own incompetence. My pain wasn't valid. It was just jealousy. I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. My throat felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. It wasn't just a family matter anymore. It was a conspiracy. They were so committed to the narrative of Leo the golden child and Christopher the grunt that they would lie, manipulate, and turn my own confessions against me to protect it. "Are you done?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm done when you stop this nonsense and apologize to your brother." "Goodbye, Dad," I said, and I hung up. I didn't just block Leo's number that day. I blocked my father's. I blocked my mother's. And with a deep, satisfying sense of finality, I blocked David's. The circle was getting smaller. And for the first time, that felt like a good thing. Felt safe. The betrayal lit a fire in me. The hurt was still there, but it was quickly being forged into something harder, something more useful. Resolve. They thought I was doing this out of spite, out of jealousy. I realized I had to prove them wrong. This wasn't about punishing Leo. It was about saving myself. But a small part of me, the part that still remembered the little brother I used to build forts with, didn't want to see him completely destitute. I didn't want him homeless. I just wanted him to stand on his own 2 feet. So, I decided to make one final, proactive move. I wouldn't give him another dollar, but I would give him a chance. A real one. I spent a whole Saturday morning working on something I hadn't looked at in years. Leo's resume. It was a pathetic document, full of holes and embellished half-truths about his ventures. I deleted all the nonsense. I focused on the skills he actually had. He was charismatic when he wanted to be, he was decent with social media, and he could talk his way out of anything. I reframed his scattered, short-lived jobs into contract positions. I highlighted his communication skills. I made him sound competent. Then, I changed the contact information to my own email and phone number. I didn't trust him to even answer a call from a potential employer. I scoured job sites for entry-level, remote administrative assistant positions. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that required a decade of experience. Just a job. Something to pay the bills. something to teach him responsibility. I found 3 promising listings and submitted his polished resume. A few days later, I got a call. It was from a small tech startup in Colorado, looking for a remote assistant. They were interested in Leo. I did a quick pre-screening call, talking up his organizational skills, and scheduled a video interview for him. Now came the hard part. I unblocked Leo's number for what I vowed would be the last time. I called him. He answered on the first ring, his voice wary. "What do you want?" "I got you a job interview," I said, straight to the point. There was a long pause. "A what?" "A job interview. Remote administrative assistant. $17 an hour, 20 hours a week to start. The interview is Thursday at 2 p.m. I'm sending you the link." He scoffed. The sound grated on my nerves. I'm not wasting my energy doing boring admin work for $17 an hour. That's not who I am. The sheer arrogance, coming from a man who was probably eating canned beans in an apartment he couldn't afford, was staggering. The fire inside me roared. "Then figure out who you are without my money," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "This is it, Leo. This is the last lifeboat I'm sending you. You can either get on it or you can sink. Your choice." I hung up before he could respond. Predictably, my mother called an hour later. "Christopher, what are you doing? You can't force Leo into a job he hates. You're being so cruel. He wasn't built like you. He needs to follow his passion." "His passion for what, Mom? Spending my salary?" I shot back. "He has an interview on Thursday. If he doesn't take it, that's his decision. But my decision is made. The bank is closed. Permanently." I ended the call. The ball was in their court. My conscience, for the first time, was clear. I hadn't just abandoned him. I had given him a map and a compass. Whether he chose to navigate his way out of the woods was up to him. To my absolute astonishment, he took the interview. And, even more shockingly, he got the job. I think the startup was so desperate for help that a living, breathing human who could form complete sentences was enough to get hired. The first few weeks were rocky. Leo complained constantly via text. I had unblocked him. Cautiously. The work was boring. His boss was demanding. The hours were too early. It was a stream of negativity that I met with a consistent, gray wall of indifference. My only replies were one-word answers. "Okay. Sure. Got it." But then, something shifted. The complaints slowed down. He actually seemed to be working. He mentioned having to wake up early for a team meeting. He asked me a question about how to format a spreadsheet. He was being paid weekly, and for the first time in his adult life, he paid his own utility bill. He sent me a screenshot of the confirmation page with no text. It was a silent, grudging admission of a tiny victory. Our family, of course, reacted as if he had just won a Nobel Prize. My parents called me not to thank me, but to gush about Leo. "He's so dedicated," my mother chirped. "He's a natural at this corporate stuff. He just needed the right opportunity to shine." My father was equally delusional. "See? The boy's got grit. Always knew he had it in him. Just needed a little push." They completely erased my role in the process. In their revised history, Leo had heroically pulled himself up by his bootstraps. I was just a footnote. The old me would have been furious. The new me just found it sad. The most surreal moment came about a month into his job. He sent me a text. "Hey, can you look at this?" It was a link to a Google Sheet. It was a budget. A simple, rudimentary budget, but a budget nonetheless. He had listed his income and his expenses. Rent, utilities, food. He was actually tracking his spending. A few days later, another text arrived. This one was different. It wasn't a complaint or a question. It just said, "I get why you were mad. I really messed things up. I'm trying, Chris. I swear I am." It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever received from him. A fragile hope began to flicker within me. Maybe this was working. Maybe he was actually changing. Around this time, I started dating. Her name was Emily. I met her through Sarah. She was smart, funny, and incredibly down-to-earth. When I told her vaguely about my family issues, she didn't offer platitudes. She just listened and said, That sounds incredibly difficult. I'm glad you're putting yourself first. Being with Emily felt like breathing fresh air after being locked in a stuffy room for a decade. She saw me for who I was, not for what I could provide. It was new. And it was wonderful. Things were looking up. The storm seemed to be passing. But I should have known. With my family, the eye of the hurricane is often the most deceptive place to be. While the drama with Leo was unfolding, things at my own job were intensifying, but in a good way. Most people at my company, a mid-sized but rapidly growing software firm, knew me as Christopher, the lead systems architect. I was the quiet guy in the corner who could solve impossible coding problems. I kept a low profile. I came in, did my work, and went home. It was a persona I had cultivated intentionally. Kept me off the radar, both professionally and personally. Only a handful of people knew the full story. One afternoon, I got a summons to the office of our CEO, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Mr. Sterling. I walked into his spacious corner office, the city skyline sprawling out behind him. "Chris, sit down," he said, gesturing to a leather chair. We spent 20 minutes discussing the final stages of our flagship project, a complex logistics platform that was about to launch. It was my baby. I had designed it from the ground up. Then, Mr. Sterling leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "The launch party is in 3 weeks. It's also a major fundraiser. We're inviting investors, the media, everyone. It's going to be a big night for the company." "Sounds great," I said. "The platform will be ready." "I'm not worried about the platform," he said with a slight smile. "I'm worried about you. You've been a ghost for 5 years, Chris. The silent partner. The man behind the curtain. Don't you think it's time for people to know who really built this place?" The truth was, I wasn't just an employee. I had met Mr. Sterling when the company was just an idea sketched on a napkin. I was his first partner. I had invested my own small inheritance from my grandfather, the portion I hadn't used to pay off Leo's gambling debts, to get the company off the ground. In return, I received a substantial chunk of equity. I was a co-founder and, on paper, the largest single shareholder. But I had insisted on anonymity. I took a salary and a title that wouldn't draw attention. Part of it was my introverted nature, but a bigger part was my family. I couldn't bear the thought of them knowing. If they treated me like an ATM when they thought I was just a mid-level engineer, what would they do if they knew I was wealthy? The demands would become suffocating. My life wouldn't be my own. "I'm not sure, Mr. Sterling," I said honestly. "The low profile works for me." He nodded, understanding. "I respect that. But at this launch, I need to give credit where credit is due. I need to tell the story of how we started. Your story is a huge part of that. Think about it. It's your call. But I think you've hidden your light under a bushel long enough." I left his office with my mind racing. For years, I had compartmentalized my life. There was work Christopher, successful and respected by the few who knew the truth. And there was family Christopher, the loser, the failure, the reliable doormat. The two identities had never touched. But now a seed was planted. What if they did? What would happen if the curtain was finally pulled back? The thought was both terrifying and, for the first time, exhilarating. I didn't know it then, but a storm was coming, and that launch party was destined to be the stage for a revelation no one saw coming. The text from Leo came 2 weeks before the company launch party. "Hey, I got a raise. $2 an hour. It's pretty cool." I told him I was proud of him, and for the first time I actually meant it. The fragile hope grew stronger. It was in this climate of cautious optimism that my mother called. She had heard about my company's big party through the grapevine, probably Aunt Carol, and was laying the pressure on thick. "Christopher, you should invite us. We'd love to see where you work. We're so proud of all your hard work, and we never get to celebrate you." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Celebrate me? Or celebrate a free night out with fancy food and drinks? Against my better judgment, and with a small, foolish part of me wanting them to see even a slit rim of my success, I agreed. I sent them 4 invitations. For my parents, Aunt Carol, and Leo. The night of the event arrived. It was held in a stunning downtown ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The air buzzed with excitement. I was in a sharp suit, feeling more nervous than I had in years. Emily was by my side, a calming presence in her elegant dress. Then my family arrived. They walked in and immediately looked out of place. They stared at the opulence with a mixture of awe and resentment. My father immediately started complaining about the valet parking fee. My mother surveyed the room with a critical eye. "It's all a bit much, isn't it?" she whispered to me. For a software company. Leo, however, was in his element. He grabbed a glass of champagne and immediately started acting like he owned the place. He was dressed in a suit that was clearly too expensive for his new salary. When I introduced him to a few of my colleagues, he'd shake their hands and say things like, "Yeah, Chris is my brother. I'm more on the entrepreneurial track myself. Can't be tied down to a desk, you know?" He was positioning himself as the cool, rebellious one compared to his stuffy corporate brother. But the worst part came when I was talking to Emily and my parents. My father looked around the room at the successful people, the palpable energy of innovation, and then he looked at me. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You know, son," he said, his voice loud enough for several people to overhear, "I know you do your best, and this is a nice little party. But don't get distracted. You still need to look out for your brother. His potential is limitless. You just punch the clock. He's going to change the world." I just stood there, speechless. Emily's hand found mine, her grip tightening. Right in the middle of my world, the one place I was a success, he had found a way to call me a failure. Just then, my phone vibrated. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it. "Hey Chris, it's Chloe, Leo's ex. I know this is random, but I heard he was telling people he quit his job to follow his dream. That's not true. I thought you should know he was fired last Friday for repeatedly missing meetings and poor performance. He begged me not to tell anyone. Sorry to be the one to tell you this. Coup twist foo number 2. My blood went cold. The raise, the budget, the apology. It was all a lie, a performance. He hadn't changed at all. He had been fired and was just waiting for the right moment to come crawling back for money, playing the part of the reformed brother until then. I looked across the room and saw him, laughing with a group of investors, charming them, probably trying to get seed money for his next fake venture. The rage that had been simmering for years began to boil over. Mr. Sterling caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle nod. It was almost time for the speeches. It was almost time for the curtain to rise. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. The buzz of conversation faded to a respectful hush. Mr. Sterling, looking commanding in his tailored suit, walked up to the podium. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice echoing through the hall. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate a monumental milestone for our company." My family had found seats near the back. I stood along the sidewall near the stage with Emily. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, probably wondering why I wasn't sitting with them, why I looked so tense. Mr. Sterling talked about the company's journey, the struggles, the breakthroughs. He thanked the investors, the employees, the partners. My father was whispering something to my mother, probably a critique of the speech. Leo was scrolling through his phone, looking utterly bored. "Every great company has an origin story," Mr. Sterling continued, his voice growing more personal. "Ours began not in a boardroom, but in a cramped garage with 2 guys, a mountain of student debt, and an idea we believed in." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Everyone here knows me as the CEO, the face of the company. But tonight I want to talk about the heart of it, the architect, the man whose brilliance is the foundation upon which every single one of our successes has been built." My father actually yawned. I saw it from the corner of my eye. "He's a man who has avoided the spotlight," Mr. Sterling said, his eyes scanning the room until they locked with mine. "He preferred to let his work speak for itself. He poured not just his genius, but his own savings, a small inheritance from his grandfather, into this company when it was nothing more than a gamble. And it paid off. Suddenly, A massive screen behind the stage, which had been showing the company logo, flickered to life. It was a live feed from a camera at the back of the room, and it was pointed directly at me. My face, 10 feet high, was now broadcast to everyone in the ballroom. A murmur went through the crowd. I saw my parents' heads snap in my direction. Their eyes widened. Leo looked up from his phone, his jaw literally dropping. Mr. Sterling's voice boomed. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor to finally, officially, introduce you to my co-founder, our largest shareholder, and the chief architect of our entire system, Christopher." The room exploded into applause. It was a wave of sound, a thunderous roar of recognition. People were turning, pointing, smiling at me. My colleagues, the ones who knew, were cheering the loudest. I just stood there, frozen in the spotlight, my face on the giant screen. And then I looked at my family. The color had drained from their faces. My father's mouth was agape, his smug expression replaced by one of utter, slack-jawed disbelief. My mother's hand was pressed against her chest, her eyes wide with shock. Aunt Carol looked like she had seen a ghost. But the best reaction was Leo's. He was staring at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. The charming, arrogant mask had shattered, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. The blood rushed to his face, then drained away, leaving him looking pale and sick. He understood. In that one public moment, his entire worldview, his entire sense of superiority had been nuked from orbit. The loser brother, the boring grunt, the family ATM, was the wealthiest, most successful person he had ever known. And he had just spent a decade treating him like dirt. Mr. Sterling beckoned me to the stage. As I walked forward, out of the shadows and into the light, the applause grew louder. I felt Emily squeeze my hand one last time before letting go. It was a step I had to take alone. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. This was the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my own story. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You guys are amazing. Please do me a favor and hit that like button and comment the number 1 down below, just so I know you made it this far with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal haze. After a brief, heartfelt speech where I thanked Mr. Sterling and my team, I was swarmed. Investors wanted to shake my hand. Colleagues clapped me on the back. People who had barely known my name were suddenly treating me like royalty. I avoided my family. I saw them huddled in their corner, watching me. They didn't leave. They just stood there, looking lost and small in a world that was suddenly mine. When the event finally wound down, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I found them by the coat check, a silent, miserable-looking group. "I'll drive you home," I said. It wasn't a question. The drive was the most excruciatingly silent 20 minutes of my life. The air in my car, a modest but comfortable sedan they had probably once scoffed at, was thick with unspoken words. I had the driver's seat. I controlled the car. And for the first time, I controlled the entire dynamic. The power shift was palpable. My mother tried to break the silence first. She cleared her throat. "Christopher," she began, her voice small and tentative. We had no idea. Why didn't you ever tell us?" I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes on the road. My silence was a wall she couldn't climb. My father tried next, attempting a gruff, man-to-man tone that now sounded laughably hollow. "That Sterling fellow seems like a good man. You did well for yourself, son. We're proud." Proud. The word sounded like poison in the enclosed space. Proud now? Where was that pride when I was working overtime to pay for Leo's bar tabs? Where was it when they were laughing at my birthday party? I remained silent. Leo was in the back seat, wedged between my father and Aunt Carol. He hadn't said a single word. I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was staring out the window, his face a pale, ghostly reflection in the glass. The cocky bravado was gone, replaced by a cowering shame. He looked like a child who had just been caught in a lie too big to escape. They had spent years crafting a narrative, a family mythology where I was the dependable, boring loser and he was the brilliant, misunderstood star. I had just burned that storybook to the ground in front of 300 people. They didn't know what to say because their entire script had been rendered useless. My silence was my answer. It was my weapon. It told them everything they needed to know. The man who had driven them to the party was not the same man who was driving them home. And things would never, ever be the same. When I pulled up to my parents' house, I put the car in park but left the engine running. The message was clear. I was not staying. They didn't move. They clearly expected or hoped that we would all go inside and have a family talk, where they would try to recalibrate, to absorb this new reality into their world, to figure out their new angle of attack. "Aren't you coming in?" my mother asked, her voice laced with a desperate hope. "No," I said, turning to face them for the first time. I looked at each of them in turn. My mother, her face etched with confusion. My father, his expression a mixture of anger and bewilderment. And Leo, who couldn't even meet my eyes. "We need to talk about this, Christopher." My father insisted, his authoritative tone returning. But it was weak now, a shadow of its former power. I finally spoke, my voice calm and measured, devoid of the anger and hurt that had fueled me for so long. All that was left was a cold, hard clarity. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "For years, you have treated me as a utility, not as a son or a brother. You valued me only for what I could provide, and you resented me for it at the same time. You laughed when I was insulted. You enabled a destructive lifestyle that nearly broke me. You dismissed my struggles and magnified my flaws to make yourselves feel better." I paused, letting the words settle. "That ends tonight. The life you saw on display tonight, I built that. I built it with no help from you. In fact, I built it while carrying all of you on my back. And I'm done." "Son," my dad started. "You're being emotional." "No," I cut him off. "I'm being logical. Here are the new terms. Our relationship, if it is to continue, will be one of mutual respect. You will not ask me for money. You will not ask me to solve your problems. You will not interfere in my life or my relationships. We can see each other on holidays if I choose. But the daily entanglement, the drama, the manipulation, it's over." I then turned my gaze to Leo in the rearview mirror. "And you," I said, "you are on your own. I know you were fired. Don't ever come to me for money again. It's time to grow up." Tears started to well up in my mother's eyes. "You can't do this," she whispered. "We're family." "A family doesn't do what you did," I said, my voice final. "This isn't a negotiation. This is a declaration of independence. Now, please get out of my car." They sat there for a moment, stunned into silence. Then, slowly, wordlessly, they opened the doors and got out. They stood on the curb like strangers, watching as I put the car in drive and pulled away, not even looking back in the rearview mirror. I was driving toward my own life, and for the first time, there was no one in the passenger seat trying to grab the wheel. The year that followed was like stepping out of a black and white movie into full, dazzling color. With the truth out in the open, I stopped hiding. I took my rightful place at the company, not just as a coder but as a leader. I embraced my role as co-founder, and I found that I was actually good at it. The crippling anxiety that had followed me for years began to recede, replaced by a quiet confidence I never knew I possessed. But the biggest change wasn't professional. It was personal. Free from the constant drain of my family's manufactured crises, I had so much energy. Energy to invest in my relationship with Emily, which blossomed into something deep and beautiful. We moved in together, into a house with a small backyard, something I'd never dreamed I could afford. We hosted barbecues for our friends, for Sarah and her husband, for my colleagues. We were building our own family, one based on choice and mutual respect, not obligation and guilt. This was my new family. Sarah, who had been my rock, was like a sister. Mr. Sterling became a mentor and a father figure. Ben, an older colleague who had always offered quiet words of wisdom, became a trusted confidant. They were the people who had seen my worth long before it was announced on a stage. Emily was the center of this new world. She taught me what a healthy partnership looked like. There was no scorekeeping, no manipulation. When she had a problem, she told me. When I was struggling, I could tell her without fear of my words being twisted and used against me. We were a team. One evening, we were sitting in our backyard, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "You seem different," she said, resting her head on my shoulder. "Lighter." "I am," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd ever said. "I feel like I spent 30 years walking around with a 100-pound backpack on, and I didn't even realize it until I finally took it off." I did have some contact with my family. I sent a simple, generic card for birthdays and Christmas. My mother would occasionally send me long, rambling texts, full of passive-aggressive comments and attempts to make me feel guilty. I would reply with a single, polite sentence, giving her nothing to latch onto. I was a gray rock. My father and I didn't speak at all. I was building a life so full of joy and peace that there was simply no room for their toxicity. I was finally living the life I had sacrificed for them, but I was living it for myself. And it was better than anything I could have ever imagined. The ghosts of the past were still there, but they were fading, growing quieter with every sunrise in my new, peaceful world. While my life was expanding, theirs was contracting. I didn't seek out news about them, but it trickled in anyway, mostly through my cousin, Ethan, Mark's brother, who had always been a quiet observer of the family drama. Leo, as expected, crashed and burned spectacularly. Without my income to support his delusions of grandeur, his life unraveled. His attempts at being an entrepreneur were disastrous. He tried to launch a line of t-shirts, but never managed to print more than a few samples. He talked about becoming a crypto day trader and lost the little money he had. He couldn't hold down a job because every position was beneath him. Eventually, evicted from his apartment, he had no choice but to swallow his pride and move back home into his childhood bedroom. The golden child had returned to the nest, not in triumph, but in total defeat. His failure had a domino effect. My parents, who had lived comfortably for years, were now shouldering the full financial burden of a grown man with expensive tastes and no income. My father had to postpone his retirement. They had to sell their large family home, the one they'd been so proud of, and downsize to a small condo. The stage for their family theater had been sold off to pay for the lead actor's refusal to get a real job. The most surprising revelation, however, came from Aunt Carol. About 6 months after the party, she called me. Her voice was syrupy sweet, as always. After 5 minutes of pleasantries, she got to the point. She was in a bit of a financial bind and was wondering if I could help her out with a small loan. This was my chance. "I'm sorry, Aunt Carol, but I have a strict policy about not lending money to family," I said, my voice polite but firm. Her tone soured instantly. "Well, I never, after all I've done to try and keep this family together. I was only asking because I was so generous with Leo, and it's left me a little short." My ears perked up. Generous with Leo? She must have realized her mistake, because she started to backtrack. But it was too late. I pressed her, and the truth finally tumbled out. For years, she had been borrowing money from Leo. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars. Of course, it wasn't his money. It was mine. She had been taking a cut. Her constant calls for peace and family harmony weren't about love. They were about protecting her secret source of income. She needed me to keep funding Leo so she could keep skimming off the top. Coup twist foo number 3. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. She wasn't a peacekeeper. She was a parasite, just like the rest of them. The entire family system wasn't just dysfunctional. It was corrupt, rotten to the core. Hearing all this didn't bring me satisfaction. It just brought a profound sadness. They had all made their choices. They chose pride over humility, image over substance, and entitlement over effort. And now they were living with the consequences. I hadn't destroyed them. Their own actions had. I had just stopped being the foundation that held up their house of cards. And without me, it had collapsed, as it was always destined to do. It's been 2 years now since that birthday party. 2 years since I chose myself. My life is quiet, and I mean that in the best possible way. The constant hum of anxiety is gone. The phone doesn't feel like a bomb that could go off at any moment. It's just peaceful. Emily and I got married last spring. It was a small ceremony in our backyard with our chosen family. Sarah gave a speech that made everyone cry. Mr. Sterling walked me down the aisle, a gesture that meant more to me than he'll ever know. My biological family was not invited. I sent them a photo afterward. My mother's only reply was, "The flowers were nice." A few weeks ago, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I got a text from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was. It was Leo. The message was short. "I'm working at a coffee shop. It's not much, but I'm paying my own bills. I'm sorry, Chris, for everything." There was no request for money. There were no excuses. It was the first honest communication I had received from him in my entire adult life. I stared at the message for a long time. The old me would have jumped at the chance to fix things, to dive back in. But the new me is wiser. I didn't reply, but I didn't block the number either. Forgiveness is a complicated thing, isn't it? It's not about forgetting. It's not about letting someone who hurt you back into your life to do it all over again. I think, for me, forgiveness is just letting go. Letting go of the anger, the resentment, the hope that they will ever be the family I needed them to be. They are who they are, and I am who I am. Not the loser, not the ATM, not the rock, just Christopher. And for the first time, that feels like more than enough. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. It's been a long and difficult journey, and sharing it helps. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your family and your own well-being? I'd be honored to read about your experience. Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what I share next. Take care of yourselves.